I still remember that fateful night as if it were splashed in red neon on my soul, a moment when betrayal and defiance collided, shattering everything I once believed in. My wife was out, laughing with her lover over an elegant dinner while I stood alone in our silent home. In a surge of numb determination, I changed the locks, severing the last tangible link to the life we'd shared. When she returned, her reaction, caught between shock and desperate indignation, was, in one word, priceless. That single act of reclaiming my space became the spark that ignited a long, tumultuous journey of heartbreak, self-discovery, and an unexpected reckoning with love. I'd always thought our marriage was built on mutual trust, quiet routines, and the unspoken promise that we'd weather life's storms together. For years, our home was our sanctuary, a place of shared meals, whispered secrets, and the comfortable familiarity of two souls intertwined. But as time passed, subtle cracks began to form. Late nights on the phone, furtive glances when I thought she wasn't watching, and the growing distance in her laughter all hinted at a secret that I, in my complacency, chose to ignore. I told myself it was just the natural ebb and flow of long-term love. I never imagined that one night, those small warnings would explode into a betrayal that would leave me reeling. That night everything changed. My wife, Marianne, had been invited to a dinner party, an event I'd warned her about, urging caution over frivolity. I had sensed, though never quite admitted to myself, that something was amiss. My heart pounded with a foreboding dread as I watched her leave, the sound of her car's engine fading into the dark. Left in the silent void of our home, I felt a numbness that soon turned to a burning resolve. I couldn't shake the images from my mind, the whispered excuses, the hidden texts, the fleeting smiles exchanged with a stranger. I had to do something to reclaim my power, to assert that I wasn't going to let her betrayal go unanswered. So, while Marianne was out enjoying her dinner with her lover, I took the one decisive action that I'd been dreading for weeks. I changed the locks. I moved through our once familiar home with a strange mixture of sorrow and determination, each step echoing with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. I retrieved the spare keys from a dusty drawer, my hands trembling as I inserted the new lock on our front door. With each click of the mechanism, it was as if I was not only securing our home but also sealing off the life I thought I'd known. I spent those long minutes in a fog of conflicting emotions, anger, humiliation, and a desperate longing for some semblance of control. The act of changing the locks felt both symbolic and liberating. I wasn't just barring entry, I was drawing a line in the sand. I wondered if Marianne would realize what I had done, if she'd feel the full weight of the betrayal and the consequences of her choices. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about revenge or pain, I was thinking about survival, about protecting what little remained of my dignity. Hours later, as the clock ticked toward midnight, the door finally creaked open. I remember standing in the dim hallway, heart hammering as Marianne returned. The fluorescent light of the foyer illuminated her face, a mixture of shock, panic, and something else I couldn't quite decipher. Her eyes darted to the lock and then to me. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The silence was deafening, a chasm filled with the unspoken truth of her infidelity. Then, as if trying to regain control of the situation, her voice trembled. What did you do?" I struggled to keep my voice steady as I replied, "I changed the locks, Marianne. I can't let you walk back into our home like nothing happened." My words, though measured, cut deeper than I'd ever intended. In that charged moment, the air between us crackled with raw emotion, betrayal, regret, and a hint of the unspoken realization that nothing would ever go back to the way it was. Her reaction was a melody of emotions. First shock, then anger, then a desperate pleading that broke my heart. "You're insane," she cried, her voice wavering between fury and panic. "You can't do this to me, we're married." But I saw in her eyes something I'd long suspected. The thrill of the night, the taste of forbidden freedom, had emboldened her in ways I never imagined. She turned away as if the sight of me was a curse, and for a long moment, I felt the crushing weight of isolation, a man abandoned by the one he'd once trusted. As the initial storm of emotions subsided, I retreated to our living room, trying to process what had just happened. I sat on the couch, clutching a throw pillow as if it could somehow shield me from the truth. Every detail of that night, her laughter at the dinner, the subtle glances shared with her lover, and now her reaction to the changed locks, played in my mind like a relentless film. I found myself questioning everything. Was this truly about the lock, or was it a symbolic break from a life I had long taken for granted? Had I been so blind to her discontent that I failed to see the slow erosion of our connection? In the silence of that darkened room, with the distant hum of traffic outside my window, I began to understand that the act of changing the locks was more than an impulsive reaction. It was a desperate bid for self-preservation. It was a refusal to let my world crumble without a fight. I realized that I had spent so many years living in a state of comfortable routine that I had forgotten what it meant to truly safeguard my heart. The lock on our door was now a barrier, a physical manifestation of the emotional walls that had been built between us. The next morning, I awoke with a heavy mix of regret and grim determination. I knew that the coming days would be a crucible in which I'd be forced to confront not only my wife's betrayal but also my own role in the slow disintegration of our marriage. I reached for my journal and began to write feverishly, pouring out the torrent of feelings that had overtaken me, the initial shock, the searing anger at her infidelity, the heartbreak at realizing that our shared life was a fragile construct that could be shattered by one reckless act. Each word was a raw admission, a plea for understanding from a man who had, perhaps, lost himself in the pursuit of stability. I spent that day in a haze of introspection and painful self-doubt. I roamed the familiar halls of our home, now locked in the new security of my own making, wondering if I could ever reclaim the trust that had been broken. I reached out to a friend for advice, and through a long, tearful conversation, I began to see that this was a turning point, a moment when I had to decide whether to wallow in despair or to rise from the wreckage of my shattered life. My friend's words, gentle yet insistent, reminded me that while I could not change what had happened, I could change how I would move forward. By the end of that tumultuous day, I realized that the lock was not just a barrier to keep her out, it was a symbol of the new boundaries I needed to establish to protect myself. I resolved that I would embark on a journey of self-discovery, of healing, and of reclaiming the parts of me that had been lost amid the betrayal. I didn't know if I would ever forgive her or if our marriage could ever be mended, but I knew that I could no longer allow myself to be defined by that moment. I would transform this pain into a stepping stone toward a future where I was not a victim but a survivor. As twilight fell and I sat alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the quiet sky, I felt a bittersweet sense of liberation. The changed locks on our door were a reminder that sometimes, in the darkest moments, we have the power to reclaim our space and redefine our identity. I made a promise to myself that I would use the lessons of this painful night to rebuild a life of dignity and strength, even if that meant facing a future filled with uncertainty and the echoes of lost love. I woke the next morning to a heavy, surreal quiet that seemed to stretch into every corner of our home. The night's events replayed in my mind like a shattered film, her stunned face, the shock in her eyes as she confronted the changed locks, and the desperate mix of anger, regret, and sorrow in my own heart. I spent that long, cold morning alone in our living room, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator as if it were trying to comfort me. Every detail of the previous night, the crisp sound of the lock clicking into place, the shock of her reaction as she discovered that barrier, the way her voice had trembled when she tried to speak, swirled in my head. I felt a gnawing emptiness, a deep regret for what had been lost and the irrevocable damage that had been done. I knew that nothing could instantly mend the raw wounds of betrayal, and that trust, once broken so publicly, would require time, courage, and perhaps a measure of humility from both of us. With that thought heavy on my mind, I reached for my journal, the silent confidant that had captured so many of my darkest moments. My pen trembled as I began to write. Tonight, the silence of our home is filled with the echoes of broken promises. I wrote about the paradox of that evening, how in a single impulsive act, I had secured the front door and with it, the boundaries of our shared past, while simultaneously exposing the fragile heart of our union. By mid-afternoon, I knew I couldn't remain alone with my spiraling thoughts. I dialed her number. It took several rings before I heard her voice, a soft, tentative sound that was both familiar and heartbreakingly distant. "We need to talk," she said, her tone a mixture of resignation and sorrow. I agreed, and we arranged to meet at a quiet, almost forgotten cafe on the edge of town, a neutral place where we might speak honestly without the suffocating eyes of our usual surroundings. The cafe was almost empty when I arrived. I chose a small table near the window, the muted afternoon light filtering through dusty glass, lending everything a soft, reflective quality. Moments later she appeared. Her face, framed by strands of disheveled hair, wore an expression of deep fatigue and contrition. There was a sadness in her eyes that mirrored my own, and for a long moment, we sat in silence, letting the weight of unspoken words settle between us. Finally she spoke, her voice cracking as if she were reliving every painful moment of the previous night. I didn't expect you'd actually change the locks," she began haltingly. "I thought I'd be able to come back like nothing happened. But I know now that I've hurt you in ways I can't begin to understand." Her words trembled with remorse, and as she continued, I saw a woman wrestling with her own choices. I wanted that adventure, that thrill, but it wasn't worth this pain. I thought I needed to feel alive by chasing something different, but now I'm not sure. I feel lost. Her confession cut through the guarded walls I'd built around myself. I mustered all the strength left in me and said, I never wanted to hurt you, Elise. When you left that night, everything I believed about us was shattered. I was angry, devastated, and I acted out of pure hurt. Changing the locks wasn't just about keeping you out. It was about protecting myself from a pain that I couldn't bear to see repeated, a pain that made me feel unworthy. My voice was raw and unsteady, laden with the anguish of betrayal but also with a desperate hope for some kind of understanding. We talked for hours in that quiet corner of the cafe. We discussed our memories, the little moments of joy we had once shared, a spontaneous laugh over a silly joke, the comfort of each other's presence on a rainy day. I asked her why she had chosen that fateful night to leave, why she had sought excitement over the life we'd built together. She hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. I felt suffocated, trapped in a routine that I didn't even know I resented until it was too late, she whispered. I thought that if I experienced something wild, something that broke the monotony, I would find a part of me that was missing. But instead, I only found regret and isolation. Her words struck me deeply. I realized that the root of our problems was not simply that she had an affair, it was that we had both lost touch with what made our relationship special. We had grown complacent, assuming that routine and stability were enough to sustain us. But in the pursuit of that more, she had left behind the quiet beauty of our shared life. I admitted softly, I always believed that our simple, honest life was enough for us. I never wanted extravagance, I wanted us in all our imperfections. The conversation was long and painful. We revisited moments of miscommunication, times when we had both taken each other for granted. I shared how her actions had made me feel exposed, humiliated, and profoundly alone. She listened, her eyes never leaving mine, as if trying to see the man she once loved beyond the hurt. There were tears, anger, and moments of raw vulnerability. At times, it seemed as if we were slowly unearthing the buried fragments of our connection, bits of the love that had once promised so much. As dusk fell and the sky turned a deep, sorrowful blue, we made a tentative pact to try to rebuild our lives, not necessarily to restore everything to what it once was, but to create something new, forged in honesty and mutual understanding. We agreed to attend couples counseling, to explore the deeper issues that had led us astray, and to commit to a slow process of healing. Neither of us promised that the journey would be easy, nor did we guarantee that our old intimacy would fully return. But in that quiet cafe, amidst shared tears and heartfelt promises, there was a flicker of hope, a belief that our love, though fractured, might yet be mended. Over the next several months, our progress was uneven but real. In counseling sessions, we learned to communicate our needs without judgment. I worked hard to rebuild the trust that had been so callously broken. I began to see that forgiveness was not a one-time act but a continuous process, a series of small, courageous decisions to let go of the past, even as its shadows lingered. Slowly, we reintroduced physical closeness. The first time I held her hand after weeks of icy distance, it felt tentative and fragile, yet it carried with it the promise of something new, a rebuilding of our bond on a foundation that acknowledged our pain but also our capacity to heal. At home we made changes. We began setting aside evenings just for us. No distractions, no lingering resentments, only time to talk and to rediscover each other's presence. We started taking walks together in the early morning, where the cool, fresh air seemed to wash away the heaviness of our previous missteps. With each shared moment, I began to see that while our past could never be erased, it could be transformed into the building blocks of a future that was honest and real. I also turned inward. I resumed writing daily, chronicling not just the pain, but also the small victories. When a difficult conversation ended in mutual understanding, when a silent tear gave way to a tentative smile. I discovered that in sharing my story on a private blog, I could connect with others who had faced similar betrayals and found the courage to rebuild. The messages of support, the shared stories of heartbreak and recovery, served as a balm to my wounded soul and a reminder that I was not alone in this struggle. One evening, after a particularly moving counseling session, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the lines of sorrow etched around my eyes, the quiet determination in my gaze, and the subtle hope that shone through the pain. In that moment, I realized that I had begun to reclaim not only my dignity but also my identity, a man who was more than the sum of his mistakes, who had the strength to face his deepest wounds and to grow from them. I understood that while the scars of betrayal might always remain, they no longer had to dictate my future. At our next counseling session, we both acknowledged that the journey toward reconciliation was far from complete. There were still moments when the past would intrude, the memory of that humiliating night, the sting of unspoken words, the cold barrier of distrust. But now we had begun to lay a new foundation, one built on shared responsibility, honest dialogue, and the willingness to see each other not as the sum of our failures, but as individuals capable of growth and change. I also came to appreciate that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, a way to release the bitterness that can trap us in an endless cycle of regret. While I could not erase what had happened, I was determined to let it fuel a positive transformation. I chose to see every setback as an opportunity to learn, every painful memory as a stepping stone to a stronger, wiser self. I began to envision a future where our relationship might evolve into something different from what we once had. A relationship built on mutual respect, where we both acknowledged our imperfections and strove to be better together. Now, as I sit here in the soft glow of twilight with the gentle hum of the evening outside, I feel a quiet, steadfast hope. My wife and I are still far from the effortless intimacy we once enjoyed, but we are taking steps, small, deliberate steps, toward healing. We have learned that love is not a static state but a dynamic process that demands effort, patience, and courage. Each day we choose to work on our communication, to share our vulnerabilities, and to forgive the past while embracing the possibility of a new beginning. I know that the road ahead will be long and filled with challenges. There will be days when old wounds reopen, when words that once hurt will resurface, and when the silence between us will be thick with unspoken pain. But I also know that I have discovered within myself a resilience I never knew existed, a strength born from the crucible of heartbreak and nourished by the quiet moments of self-discovery. I have learned that the most profound transformations often begin at our lowest points, and that every scar is a testament to our capacity to rise, to rebuild, and to move forward with renewed purpose. As I close my journal tonight, I am filled with a sense of cautious optimism. My journey from that devastating, humiliating night to this moment of tentative reconciliation has been fraught with pain, regret, and hard-won lessons. Yet, it has also been a journey of growth, a journey that has taught me to value honesty, to embrace vulnerability, and to understand that the path to redemption is paved with both struggle and hope. I may not know what the future holds, and my relationship with my wife may never fully return to its former state, but I now stand ready to face whatever comes with an open heart and an unyielding commitment to live authentically. The past will always be a part of me, a reminder of the night when everything changed, when betrayal shattered our shared illusions. But I have learned that from the fragments of that broken trust, one can rebuild a life of genuine meaning. I choose to see every tear as a step toward healing, every painful memory as a lesson in resilience. I have reclaimed my dignity, not by erasing the scars, but by letting them guide me to a future where I am stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. And so, as the last rays of the sun fade into the soft embrace of twilight, I take a deep breath and look toward tomorrow with hope. I know that healing is not linear, that every day is a fresh start, a chance to rebuild, to forgive, and to love with all the courage that the human heart can muster. I am on a long road to redemption, and I am determined to keep walking one step at a time, until I finally reclaim the future I deserve.